Gather around, my friends, as I recount a harrowing tale that took place in the sun-kissed lands of Portugal. We find ourselves transported to a time when I was but a tender 5-year-old, accompanied by my family on our annual holiday escapade. Portugal, a land of beauty and intrigue, held the promise of unforgettable memories. Little did we know that fate had something sinister in store, lurking in the shadows of our idyllic getaway. The backdrop was a secluded villa, far removed from the bustling towns and cities, nestled amidst the tranquil embrace of nature. My family, seeking respite from the mundane routines of daily life, had chosen this serene abode as our sanctuary. In hindsight, one may question the wisdom of such a decision, considering the haunting tale of young Madeline McCann that had gripped the nation just a year prior. Yet, oblivious to the dark undercurrents that swirled around us, we embarked on our Portuguese adventure. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an ethereal glow upon the land, my parents and I retreated to our respective chambers. But being the restless sleeper that I was, I often found myself roused from slumber by the sounds of my parents moving about in the kitchen. Curiosity compelled me to venture forth, seeking solace in their presence. However, on that fateful night, an intangible sense of foreboding clung to the air, chilling my young heart. Stepping into the dimly lit corridor, my ears strained to catch the familiar cadence of my parents' voices, but silence prevailed. A veil of darkness enshrouded the once familiar space, unsettling my tender senses. Gazing back into my room, a feeble nightlight flickered, its spectral glow casting eerie shadows upon the walls. Fear began to tighten its grip on my innocent soul, urging me to seek refuge in my bed. Yet, an inexplicable instinct stirred within me, beckoning me toward the unknown. With trepidation weighing upon my fragile frame, I cautiously tiptoed further down the corridor, a torrent of conflicting emotions raging within. But destiny intervened, casting its protective gaze upon me. A sudden surge of intuition, like a whisper from the ethereal realms, urged me to retreat. I turned on my heels, sprinting back to the warmth and familiarity of my bed, surrendering to the sweet embrace of sleep. Morning broke, and with it came a jarring sight. The once familiar abode now bore the marks of chaos and violation. The police stood sentinel, their presence a stark reminder of the ordeal that had unfolded in the night's dark embrace. The rooms lay in disarray, stripped of their possessions, as if a malevolent force had swept through, devouring our material belongings with insatiable hunger. We had fallen victim to the depravity of thieves, our sanctuary desecrated by their merciless hands. They had snatched away our prized possessions, leaving behind only remnants of shattered glass and shattered dreams. As my gaze fell upon the ravaged kitchen and TV room, a shiver ran down my spine. A chilling realization gripped my heart as I contemplated what might have transpired had I followed my initial instinct. The tendrils of fear tightened their grip on my soul, whispering of the lurking dangers that lay hidden within the night. What if I had ventured into that TV room, oblivious to the presence of intruders lurking in the shadows? The mere thought sends shivers down my spine, conjuring nightmarish scenarios that I dare not envision. Though the likelihood of a nefarious kidnapping may seem remote, the specter of possibility looms, casting a pall of uncertainty over the events that transpired. The chilling truth remains. Good evening, my friends. I'm not one to scare easily, but the events of the past few weeks have left me feeling uneasy, to say the least. As you may know, I'm currently between places to live and staying at my boyfriend's house. He lives in a cozy little place with a shared yard, which is rented out by the same landlord as his neighbors. At first, everything seemed normal, but as the days went on, strange things started happening. It started with the sounds coming from the neighbor's bedroom. They were loud and impossible to ignore. My boyfriend and I shrugged it off as a minor annoyance, but things quickly escalated from there. One night, we were jolted awake by the sound of a chainsaw and screams coming from their house. We debated going over to check on them, but ultimately decided to call the police instead. The next day, they all seemed perfectly fine, but something about the incident didn't sit right with me. Then came the incident with the wife. I was leaving for work one morning when I saw her outside in nothing but sweatpants, her ample bosom on full display. She seemed unfazed by my presence and just carried on with her business. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about her. The final straw came when my boyfriend and I were trying to sleep, and we heard them stomping on the floor and chanting. It was eerie and unsettling, to say the least. My boyfriend decided to confront them, but they denied any wrongdoing and claimed they weren't on drugs. We didn't believe them, but we let it go and went back to bed. The next day, I found the wife passed out by their fire pit. As a nurse, I rushed to her aid, but it was too late. She wasn't breathing. We called 911, and it turned out that all three of them had suffered from carbon monoxide poisoning. They were lucky to have survived, but I can't help but wonder what might have happened if we hadn't intervened. The whole experience has left me feeling uneasy, and I can't help but feel like there's something sinister lurking just beneath the surface. Maybe it's just my overactive imagination, but I can't shake the feeling that something isn't right about those neighbors. I hope I'm wrong, but I'm not sure I'll ever feel completely safe around them again. So, my friends, take heed, be safe, and always make sure your home is up to code before moving in. You never know what kind of danger might be lurking just beneath the surface. Picture this. The air was laden with an indescribable sense of foreboding as I ventured towards the entrance of the 6th grade hall. It was on this fateful morning that the stage was set, and the elements of this sinister tale converged in a manner that would forever alter my perception of the world. As I approached the school building, an ominous sight materialized. A small food delivery truck, positioned malevolently near the entrance. Its presence, like a silent harbinger of impending doom, seemed to beckon unsuspecting souls into its clutches. Suddenly, a voice shattered the uneasy silence, slicing through the air with a chilling invitation. "Do you want some chips?" The driver, casting a grotesquely exaggerated grin, dangled a bag of crisps in a manner that bordered on the realm of nightmarish caricature. My instincts, honed by a myriad of cautionary tales, ignited like a flickering candle in the wind. I sensed the unmistakable tendrils of deception, the calculated ruse to lure an unsuspecting victim into the clutches of darkness. It was as if I had stepped into a poorly scripted public service announcement, an admonition on how not to succumb to the clutches of the malevolent forces that prowl the streets. Curiously, fear did not consume me. Rather, a profound clarity washed over my young mind, as though a hidden tapestry of wisdom unfurled before me. In an instant, I recognized the puppet master pulling the strings, an embodiment of evil plucked from the nightmares of generations past. My mind whispered, "This is one of those nefarious villains they incessantly warn us about." With an undaunted smile, I defied the darkness that sought to ensnare me. I shook my head, resolute in my rejection of the chips, and ventured into the school building as though untouched by the terrors that loomed. For a moment, I felt an ember of amusement flicker within me, for the years of overprotective parenting in the bygone era had forged an impenetrable armor, shielding me from harm without falter. It is only now, as an adult, that the gravity of the situation dawns upon me like a storm cloud engulfing the sun. I realized the precarious precipice upon which I stood, a mere step away from untold horrors that could have befallen me. "Shit," I exclaimed silently, the weight of the potential dangers crashing upon my consciousness like a wave. In hindsight, I lament the fleeting thought that I should have confided in a trusted adult, unveiling the sinister encounter that had transpired. Yet, in the realm of my youthful perception, the threat had been resolved, a phantom vanquished by the unwavering strength of my instinctual resolve. It was a trip that was supposed to be fun, a chance to explore the wonders of London and make lasting memories. But for me and my best friend, it turned into a nightmare we would never forget. We were both barely 14 years old, excited to be on a school trip abroad, but completely unprepared for what was about to happen. It was the day before we were supposed to leave and go home, and we were brought to a street with some interesting shops to do some last-minute shopping. But when our teachers and guide told us to meet them at a different street, things started to go wrong. Most of us had never been to London before, and we didn't have a map or proper guidance. Roaming services were not working correctly, and we were all confused and disoriented. My best friend and I got separated from the group because we went in the opposite direction. We were walking along the pavement, not really interacting with each other, when something happened that changed everything. My friend ran ahead and stopped to look around when suddenly, a black car approached me and matched my speed. I started to feel like I was in a scene from a horror movie. It was broad daylight, with lots of people around, but no one reacted to what was happening. Then a man stepped out of the car and said to me, "You are nice, come with me." I was stunned, unsure if what was happening was real. The car was still running, so I assumed someone was still in it. At that moment, my friend ran to me from behind, grabbed me, and dragged me away. We ran as fast as we could, trying to lose whoever was following us. After some time, we stopped and asked some people for help. Eventually, we were found by our teachers, but we didn't tell anyone what happened. We were sure that no one would believe us. When we got back home, I told my parents everything that had happened. My mom was horrified by the unprofessional and irresponsible behavior at the school. I never went on another school-organized trip after that day. The memory of that day still haunts me to this day. I always wonder what would have happened if my friend hadn't been there to save me. It was a month that would haunt us forever. My daughter, her father, and I lived in a shared double house. One day, we decided to walk to the store, and when we returned, we discovered that someone had attempted to break into our home. The locks were dented, and there was a huge boot print on both the front and back doors. We were unsettled, wondering who would want to break in. The following days were filled with bizarre incidents. Things would be out of place where I knew I hadn't put them, and I would find weird, oily substances on random items in the house. The locks on my old windows were suddenly broken, and my dish liquid bottle had been shattered. We were on edge, and every little sound would make us jump. One day, I took out the trash, and I found a strange tool inside the dumpster. It was a metal rod with a washcloth and a blue doctor's glove tied to each end. I realized that this was the tool the person had used to try to pry open our door. The blue markings on our door were from this. To my shock and horror, I found my belongings in my neighbor's trash bag. They had been inside my home several times. When my neighbor saw me, she and her partner started to yell at me, and they seemed angry. They said they didn't steal anything, but I knew they were lying. They were shirtless, fat, redneck, old white guys. I called the police, but they didn't find anything, and my neighbors were acting even more suspiciously. They were on the phone with someone, and a few minutes later, several cars pulled up outside our house. A man got out, and he had a gun. I ran for my life, holding my daughter and screaming for mercy. Thankfully, we managed to escape, but the horror didn't end there. When we came back, we found that they had poured weed killer all over our clothes, my daughter's clothes, and all her diapers. I knew then that they wanted to hurt us. They wanted to kill us. Days turned into weeks, and the paranoia only grew. We couldn't sleep, eat, or live a normal life. We were constantly looking over our shoulders, wondering if they would strike again. Then, one day, my daughter disappeared. I searched everywhere, but I couldn't find her. The only clue was a note that read, "We have your daughter. Give us what we want, or you'll never see her again." I knew then that they were the ones who took her. They were the monsters that lurked in the shadows. I did everything in my power to get her back, but they were always one step ahead. They sent me messages telling me what they were going to do to her. They were going to hurt her, torture her, and kill her. I was living a nightmare, and I didn't know how to escape. Then, one day, I received a message from them. They said they would return my daughter to me, but I had to come alone. I knew it was a trap, but I had no choice. I had to save my daughter, no matter what. I arrived at the location they had given me, and I saw them waiting for me. They were all there, my neighbors, with their guns and their twisted smiles. I didn't hesitate. I ran towards them, hoping to catch them off guard. But they were ready for me. They started shooting, and I felt the bullets pierce my flesh. I fell. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. All of our clothes were ruined. My daughter's little dresses, her cute little onesies, everything. The smell of weed killer was overpowering, and I started to feel sick. How could someone do this to us? The police came back, and they searched the house once again. They found footprints leading to the backyard, but no sign of the people who had broken in. They took another statement from me and left. but I could tell they didn't really know what to do. I was scared and alone, and I had no idea what was going to happen next. Over the next few days, I didn't leave the house. I was too afraid to go outside, too afraid of what might happen if I did. I spent my time trying to clean up the 꽞ᴜᴜ, but it was no use. Everything was ruined. I had to throw away all of our clothes, our bedding, everything. As I sat there in my empty house, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I kept hearing strange noises, and every time I looked out the window, I thought I saw someone lurking in the shadows. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. One night, I woke up to the sound of breaking glass. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and listened as someone started to climb through my window. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, just sat there frozen in fear as the person made their way into my room. It was one of the men from before, the shirtless redneck with the smirk on his face. He looked at me and laughed, and then he started to walk towards me. I wanted to run, wanted to fight, but I couldn't move. I was trapped. He grabbed me by the hair and pulled me out of bed, and then he dragged me out of the room and down the hallway. I was screaming, begging him to stop, but he just laughed and kept going. He took me outside and threw me into the back of a truck, and then he drove away. I don't know how long I was in that truck, but it felt like hours. The man never said a word, just kept driving, and I was too scared to even move. Finally, we pulled up to a rundown old house on the outskirts of town, and he dragged me inside. The house was a mess, full of garbage and broken furniture. There were other people there, too, all of them looking at me with cold, dead eyes. They didn't say anything, just watched as the man dragged me across the floor and into a back room. In that room, there was a table with straps on it. He threw me onto the table and strapped me down, and then he started to laugh again. He pulled out a knife, and I knew then that I was going to die. I don't remember much after that. I think I passed out from the fear, or maybe he drugged me. But when I woke up, I was back in my own bed, covered in bruises and cuts. I knew then that I had to leave that house, that town, that life behind. It's been 2 years since that night, and I still have nightmares about it. But I'm alive, and I'm free, and I know that I'll never let anyone hurt me or my family again. I may have lost everything, but I gained my life back, and that's the most important thing of all. I remember the time when my mom made me befriend a boy named Colin. He was a weird kid, always talking to himself and answering himself. He had no friends, and his parents were grateful that I was his friend, even though I was not by choice. I went to his house to sleep over one night, and that was when things took a horrifying turn. Colin had bunk beds in his room, and instead of sleeping on the top bunk, he slept on the floor. When I asked him why, he said that he always had to save the top bunk for the other Colin. I asked him what he meant, but he just shrugged and ignored me. That night, I woke up in the middle of the night to hear Colin whispering something unintelligible while rocking back and forth. It was creepy, but I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep. When I woke up again, I saw Colin sitting at the edge of the bed, staring at me with a huge smile on his face. He didn't blink or say anything, just kept staring. I was too afraid to do anything, so I closed my eyes and tried to pretend it was all just a dream. But then I heard a kicking sound on the top bunk. Even though Colin was sleeping on the floor, I shouted for him to stop, but Colin just shook his head and said that the other Colin would leave me alone now. I didn't see anyone on the top bunk, but I knew that something was not right. Colin refused to talk to me about it, and I couldn't fall back asleep. I felt like I was being watched, and it was as if something was lurking in the shadows. The next morning, when I left Colin's house, I felt relieved to be away from that place. But as the days went by, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was following me. I saw shadows move in the corner of my eye, and I heard whispers in my ear when there was no one around. I tried to tell my mom about it, but she didn't believe me. She thought that I was just being paranoid and that I needed to get over it. But I couldn't get over it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Colin's smiling face staring back at me, and I heard the other Colin whispering in my ear. One night, when I was home alone, I heard a knocking on the door. I looked through the peephole, but there was no one there. I tried to go back to bed, but then I heard the knocking again. This time, I opened the door to find a little boy standing there. He looked just like Colin, but there was something off about him. His eyes were black and empty, and his smile was twisted into a sinister grin. He asked me if I wanted to come and play, and I knew that I had to get away from him. I slammed the door shut and ran to my room, but the boy followed me. I could hear his footsteps behind me, and I could feel his breath on the back of my neck. I turned around to face him, but he was gone. That was the last time I ever saw the other Colin, but I could still hear him whispering to me at night. I moved away from that town, but I know that he's still out there, waiting for someone else to take the top bunk. I remember the time when my mom made me befriend a boy named Colin. He was a weird kid, always talking to himself and answering himself. He had no friends, and his parents were grateful that I was his friend, even though I was not by choice. I went to his house to sleep over one night, and that was when things took a horrifying turn. Colin had bunk beds in his room, and instead of sleeping on the top bunk, he slept on the floor. When I asked him why, he said that he always had to save the top bunk for the other Colin. I asked him what he meant, but he just shrugged and ignored me. That night, I woke up in the middle of the night to hear Colin whispering something unintelligible while rocking back and forth. It was creepy, but I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep. When I woke up again, I saw Colin sitting at the edge of the bed, staring at me with a huge smile on his face. He didn't blink or say anything, just kept staring. I was too afraid to do anything, so I closed my eyes and tried to pretend it was all just a dream. But then I heard a kicking sound on the top bunk. Even though Colin was sleeping on the floor, I shouted for him to stop, but Colin just shook his head and said that the other Colin would leave me alone now. I didn't see anyone on the top bunk, but I knew that something was not right. Colin refused to talk to me about it, and I couldn't fall back asleep. I felt like I was being watched, and it was as if something was lurking in the shadows. The next morning, when I left Colin's house, I felt relieved to be away from that place. But as the days went by, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was following me. I saw shadows move in the corner of my eye, and I heard whispers in my ear when there was no one around. I tried to tell my mom about it, but she didn't believe me. She thought that I was just being paranoid and that I needed to get over it. But I couldn't get over it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Colin's smiling face staring back at me, and I heard the other Colin whispering in my ear. One night, when I was home alone, I heard a knocking on the door. I looked through the peephole, but there was no one there. I tried to go back to bed, but then I heard the knocking again. This time, I opened the door to find a little boy standing there. He looked just like Colin, but there was something off about him. His eyes were black and empty, and his smile was twisted into a sinister grin. He asked me if I wanted to come and play, and I knew that I had to get away from him. I slammed the door shut and ran to my room, but the boy followed me. I could hear his footsteps behind me, and I could feel his breath on the back of my neck. I turned around to face him, but he was gone. That was the last time I ever saw the other Colin, but I could still hear him whispering to me at night. I moved away from that town, but I know that he's still out there, waiting for someone else to take the top bunk.